I watched in complete shock as the bulldozer blade crashed through my shooting range. Years of work, thousands of dollars in equipment, all being destroyed right before my eyes. The county inspector stood there with his clipboard, nodding like this was completely normal, but the woman behind him was smiling. Actually smiling. Karen Matthews, the HOA president, had her arms crossed and that satisfied look on her face, like Christmas morning for a spoiled child. The machine operator did not even look at me. He just kept pushing. My steel targets crumpled like paper. My safety barriers scattered like toys. Everything I had built on my own property was being erased. I had followed every law, every regulation, every permit requirement. None of it mattered. The emergency court order in her hand gave her the power to destroy my life, and she was loving every second of it. That was the moment I realized something important. If Karen wanted to play games with power and money, I was going to show her how that game really worked. She had no idea what she had just started. 5 years ago, I thought I had found paradise. After decades of apartment living in cramped city lots, I finally had enough saved for my dream property. 15 acres of rolling hills in rural Virginia. No close neighbors, no traffic noise, just peace and quiet and enough space to breathe. The previous owner was an 80-year-old man named Frank. He walked me around the property with his old dog trailing behind us. Frank showed me every corner of the land like he was introducing me to family members. When we reached the natural valley at the back of the property, he stopped and smiled. "You know what this would be perfect for?" Frank asked. I shook my head. "A shooting range, natural backstop, good drainage, far enough from any houses to not bother nobody." That was exactly what I had been thinking. I had been a responsible gun owner for 20 years. I belonged to 3 different shooting clubs in the city, but driving an hour each way to practice was getting old. Having my own range would be incredible. Frank nodded when I told him my plans. "Good. This land should be used by someone who appreciates it, someone who understands what it means to have your own piece of America." I spent months researching before I bought. I read every zoning law, every county regulation, every HOA rule and restriction. The homeowners association was small and mostly inactive. Just 23 houses spread across several miles of country roads. Their rules were basic. Keep your grass cut. No junk cars in the yard. Nothing about noise restrictions or recreational activities. The shooting range I planned would be completely legal. I would be at least 800 yards from the nearest house, well within county noise ordinances. Private use only. No commercial activity. No business license required. Just a man practicing his constitutional rights on his own property. I closed on the house in March. By May, I had cleared the valley and built proper backstops. I installed steel targets at measured distances. I created safe firing lanes with clear sight lines. I built a small shed to store equipment and ammunition safely. Everything was done right. Everything was done legally. Those first few months were perfect. I would spend Saturday mornings at my range, practicing with different firearms, working on accuracy, testing new ammunition. Sometimes neighbors would stop by when they heard the shots. Most of them were curious and friendly. A few were gun owners themselves who appreciated what I had built. Old Frank stopped by once before he moved to Florida. He brought his grandson to see the range. Frank was proud that his land was being used well. He told his grandson that this was what America was supposed to be like. People minding their own business on their own property. I thought I had found my forever home, a place where I could live free and pursue my hobbies without bothering anyone, a place where hard work and following the rules would be enough. I was completely wrong about that last part. The problem started about 6 months after I moved in. That was when the HOA held their annual election. That was when Karen Matthews decided she wanted to run everything. Karen Matthews moved into the neighborhood 2 years before I did. She bought one of the newer houses closer to the main road. The kind of house with a perfect lawn and flowers planted in straight lines. Everything about Karen was organized and controlled, including her need to control everyone else. The HOA election happened on a Tuesday night in October. Only 7 people showed up to vote. Karen brought 3 friends with her. That was enough to get herself elected president and stack the board with her supporters. Democracy in action, I guess. The first letter arrived 2 weeks later. Certified mail. Official HOA letterhead. Karen was writing to inform me that several neighbors had complained about noise pollution from my property. She was requesting that I voluntarily cease all shooting activities to maintain neighborhood harmony. I read that letter 3 times. Noise pollution. I was shooting during legal hours on weekends. The closest house was nearly half a mile away. I had been more considerate than required by law, but Karen was just getting started. I called the phone number on the letter. Karen answered on the first ring like she had been waiting for my call. "This is about being a good neighbor," Karen said. Her voice was sweet but cold. "Some people are trying to raise families here. They do not want to hear gunfire while their children are playing outside." "I understand that," I replied. "But I am following all county noise regulations. I only shoot on weekend mornings for a few hours. I have checked with the county, and everything I am doing is completely legal." "Legal and neighborly are 2 different things," Karen said. "I am sure we can work out a compromise that makes everyone happy." But Karen was not interested in compromise. She was interested in winning. Over the next few weeks, the letters kept coming, each one more demanding than the last. She claimed to have documented noise complaints from multiple neighbors. She threatened to contact county officials about potential zoning violations. She mentioned something about property values being affected. Then the surprise inspection started. Karen would show up at my property with a clipboard and a camera. She claimed the HOA had the right to inspect for violations of the covenants. She would walk around taking pictures of my shooting range like she was documenting a crime scene. "This was not what this neighborhood was intended for," Karen said during one of her visits. She was wearing a business suit and sunglasses like some kind of federal agent. "When people buy homes here, they expect a certain quality of life." "What about my quality of life?" I asked. "What about my right to use my own property?" Karen smiled that cold smile. "Your rights end where other people's rights begin, and other people have the right to peace and quiet in their own homes." I started asking around the neighborhood. I wanted to know which neighbors were actually complaining. What I found out was interesting. Most people either did not care about the shooting or actually supported it. A few had even asked if they could come practice sometime. But 3 neighbors admitted that Karen had approached them about signing complaint letters. She had told them that property values would drop if the shooting continued. She had painted a picture of the neighborhood turning into some kind of Wild West shootout zone. Fear and property values. Those were Karen's favorite weapons. I tried to be reasonable. I offered to limit shooting to specific hours. I suggested soundproofing improvements. I even offered to let concerned neighbors visit the range to see how safe and controlled everything was. Karen rejected every compromise. "The only acceptable solution is for you to stop shooting completely," she said. "Find a gun range somewhere else if you want to play with your toys." That was when I realized this was not about noise or neighbors. This was about Karen needing to prove she had power. She had found someone who would not automatically bow down to her demands, and that made me a problem that needed to be solved. I started researching Karen's background. What I found was interesting. She had been involved in HOA disputes at her previous neighborhood, something about trying to ban certain types of pets. Before that, she had been on the City Planning Commission until she was asked to resign. Karen had a pattern of seeking positions of authority and then abusing that authority to push her personal agenda. But I also found out something else. Karen was not just fighting me for fun. She had bigger plans for the neighborhood, plans that required getting rid of anyone who might stand in her way. By December, Karen had escalated from angry letters to legal threats. She hired a lawyer who specialized in HOA enforcement. Suddenly, I was receiving documents with legal terminology and court deadlines. What had started as a neighbor dispute was turning into something much more serious. The first lawsuit was about noise ordinances. Karen claimed my shooting violated county noise regulations, despite the fact that I had already confirmed with county officials that I was in compliance. Her lawyer filed papers requesting an injunction to stop all shooting activities pending a full hearing. I had to hire my own attorney. David Morrison was a local lawyer who handled property disputes. He charged $300 per hour. Just reviewing Karen's initial paperwork cost me $1,200. This is harassment disguised as legal action, David told me during our first meeting. But we still have to respond to everything they file. That is how the system works. They can drain your resources even if they are completely wrong. The county noise hearing was held on a cold January morning. I brought documentation of all my research. I had decibel readings taken at various distances. I had letters from neighbors who supported my shooting activities. I had proof that I was following every regulation. Karen brought her 3 friends from the HOA board. They all wore business suits and carried matching folders. They had prepared statements about the negative impact of gunfire on community wellness. They talked about property values and family safety like I was running a military training camp instead of target practice. The county official who heard the case was professional but clearly annoyed. "Mr. Thompson is in full compliance with all noise ordinances," he said. "His activities are legal and properly conducted. This complaint is without merit." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Karen's lawyer immediately filed an appeal. Then he filed a separate lawsuit claiming my shooting range violated HOA covenants about commercial activities. He argued that since I had built permanent structures, I was operating a business without proper permits. That was completely ridiculous. My shooting range was for personal use only. I had never charged anyone money or advertised services, but Karen's lawyer filed the paperwork anyway. More court dates, more legal fees, more stress. The HOA covenant lawsuit required me to appear in civil court. Karen was there with her lawyer and 2 witnesses who claimed they had seen people coming and going from my property. They suggested I was running some kind of secret shooting school. "Your Honor," Karen's lawyer said, "Mr. Thompson has constructed permanent commercial-grade facilities on residential property. This violates multiple HOA covenants and potentially county zoning laws." My lawyer presented photos showing that my shooting range was clearly for personal use. Simple steel targets and basic safety barriers. Nothing commercial about it. But the judge decided to order a site inspection before making a final ruling. That site inspection was scheduled for a Thursday morning in March. The court-appointed inspector came with Karen and her lawyer. I watched them walk around my property taking notes and measurements. The inspector asked reasonable questions about safety procedures and usage patterns, but Karen kept pointing out things that bothered her. "Those targets are industrial grade," she said. "No homeowner needs equipment like that for casual shooting." "The concrete pads are permanent installations," her lawyer added. "This shows intent to operate a business facility." I wanted to scream. Everything I had built was designed to be safe and responsible. Heavy-duty targets lasted longer and were safer than cheap alternatives. Concrete pads provided stable shooting platforms and prevented erosion. These were features of good design, not evidence of commercial activity. The inspector's report took 2 weeks to complete. During those 2 weeks, I could not sleep properly. I had already spent over $8,000 on legal fees. I was starting to understand how the system could be used as a weapon against innocent people. When the report came back, it supported my position. The inspector found no evidence of commercial activity or covenant violations, but Karen's lawyer immediately filed another appeal. He also started making noise about potential environmental violations and safety hazards. "This is never going to end," I told David during one of our meetings. "She is going to keep filing lawsuits until I give up or go broke." David nodded grimly. "That is the strategy. Legal harassment through endless motions and appeals. Even when they lose, they can keep the process going. Most people eventually surrender because they cannot afford to keep fighting." But I was not most people, and Karen was about to learn that some fights cost more than she expected. The emergency court order came on a Friday afternoon in April. I was at work when my lawyer called with the news. Karen had somehow obtained an emergency injunction to demolish my shooting range. The order claimed there was an immediate safety hazard that required urgent action. "How is that possible?" I asked David. "The court inspector found no safety violations. The county confirmed I was in compliance with all regulations." "She found a different judge," David said. His voice was tight with anger. "Someone who was willing to sign an emergency order without requiring a full hearing. This is highly unusual and highly suspicious." The demolition was scheduled for Monday morning. I had less than 3 days to file an appeal or injunction to stop it. David immediately started working on emergency motions, but the legal system does not move quickly on weekends. I spent that weekend in a panic. I called every lawyer I could find. I researched emergency legal procedures. I even considered physically blocking the demolition equipment. But David warned me that interfering with a court order could result in criminal charges. "We will get this overturned," he promised, "but it might take a few days or weeks. Once they demolish the range, we can sue for damages and force them to pay for rebuilding." Sunday night, I could not sleep at all. I kept thinking about all the work I had put into building my shooting range, all the careful planning and legal research, all the money spent on quality equipment and proper safety measures. None of it mattered if someone with connections could get a corrupt judge to sign an emergency order. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. I was drinking coffee and watching the sun rise when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery coming down my driveway. 3 trucks, a bulldozer, a county inspector, and Karen Matthews in her silver sedan. I walked outside to meet them. The bulldozer operator was already unloading his machine. The county inspector had a clipboard and an official attitude. Karen stayed in her car at first, but I could see her watching through the windshield. "You cannot do this," I told the inspector. "My lawyer is filing emergency motions to stop this demolition." The inspector showed me the court order. "I have to follow what the judge signed. If you have legal objections, you need to take them up with the court." I called David on my cell phone. He was already at the courthouse trying to file emergency papers, but the clerk's office had not opened yet. The demolition was scheduled to start at 8 in the morning. The courthouse did not open until 9. "This timing is not accidental," David said. "They planned this to prevent any legal intervention." Karen finally got out of her car. She was wearing a business suit and carrying a folder of documents. She looked like she was attending a corporate presentation instead of watching someone's property being destroyed. "I am sorry it came to this," Karen said, but she did not look sorry. She looked satisfied. "If you had been reasonable from the beginning, none of this would have been necessary." Reasonable? I could not believe what I was hearing. I followed every law, every regulation, every rule. What more do you want? "I want a peaceful neighborhood where people can raise their families without worrying about gunfire," Karen said. "Some things are more important than personal hobbies." The bulldozer started up with a loud diesel rumble. The operator looked at me with something like sympathy, but he had a job to do. The blade dropped and started pushing toward my carefully constructed shooting range. I stood there helpless as years of work were destroyed in minutes. My steel targets crumpled like aluminum cans. The concrete shooting platforms cracked and shattered. The safety barriers I had built to protect neighbors were scattered like broken toys. Karen watched the entire demolition with that satisfied smile. She took pictures with her phone like she was documenting a victory. When the bulldozer finished, she walked over to inspect the rubble. "Much better," she said. "Now this looks like a proper residential property." The county inspector finished his paperwork and loaded the equipment back onto the trucks. Within 2 hours, they were gone. All that remained was a pile of broken concrete and twisted metal where my shooting range used to be. I walked through the debris in shock. Thousands of dollars in equipment destroyed. Months of careful work erased. All because one person with connections could manipulate the legal system to get what she wanted. That night, I sat on my back porch staring at the empty valley. I had lost this battle completely. Karen had outmaneuvered me using corruption and legal harassment. She had proven that following the rules meant nothing when facing someone willing to break them. But as I sat there in the darkness, something changed inside me. The grief and anger started transforming into something else, something colder and more focused. Karen thought she had won. She thought destroying my shooting range would make me give up and move away. She was wrong about that, very wrong. The weeks after the demolition were the darkest period of my life. I felt defeated and helpless. Karen had used the system against me so effectively that I questioned whether fighting back was even possible. But slowly, anger began to replace despair. And anger, properly focused, can be a powerful motivator. I started investigating Karen Matthews like she was a criminal suspect, because that is what she was. What I discovered over the next 2 months was shocking even to me. Karen was facing serious financial problems. She had bought her house at the peak of the real estate market using an adjustable rate mortgage. When interest rates went up, her monthly payments had nearly doubled. She was already 3 months behind on her mortgage and facing foreclosure. That information came from public records, but it raised an important question. How was someone facing foreclosure able to afford expensive lawyers for multiple lawsuits against me? The answer led me down a rabbit hole of corruption that went much deeper than I had imagined. Karen was working with a development company called Pinnacle Properties. They wanted to buy large sections of our neighborhood for a planned community development. The problem was that our area was zoned for rural residential use. Houses on large lots with minimal restrictions. That zoning was exactly what had attracted me to the property. But if Pinnacle could get the zoning changed to high-density residential, they could build hundreds of new houses on the same land. The profit potential was enormous. They just needed to convince county officials that the neighborhood was ready for development. Having a gun range in the middle of their planned development was a problem. It sent the wrong message about the kind of community they wanted to create. Karen had not been fighting me to protect neighbors from noise. She had been fighting me to protect a real estate deal worth millions of dollars. The more I dug, the more connections I found. Karen's lawyer had previously represented Pinnacle Properties in other zoning disputes. The judge who signed the emergency demolition order had received campaign contributions from companies connected to Pinnacle. The county inspector who oversaw the demolition had been hired by Pinnacle as a consultant on previous projects. I was not just fighting an angry neighbor. I was fighting a network of corruption designed to enrich developers at the expense of property owners. My shooting range had been demolished not because it violated any laws, but because it threatened someone's profit margins. But Karen's connections to Pinnacle had created a vulnerability. If I could prove that she had been acting on behalf of the development company rather than the homeowners association, her actions became fraud. And fraud opened up possibilities for criminal prosecution and civil lawsuits. I started reaching out to other people who had been targeted by Karen's HOA enforcement. What I found was a pattern of harassment directed at anyone who might oppose development plans. An elderly couple had been fined repeatedly for minor landscaping violations until they sold their house. A family with teenagers had been cited for noise complaints that forced them to move. 3 different property owners had been driven out through legal harassment. All of their properties had been purchased by shell companies connected to Pinnacle Properties. Karen was not just an annoying HOA president. She was a tool being used to clear land for development. I called a meeting with the other remaining homeowners who had not been targeted yet. 12 people showed up at the community center on a Tuesday night. When I presented my research, the reaction was immediate and angry. "She has been planning to steal our neighborhood," said Margaret, an elderly woman who had lived here for 15 years. All those letters and inspections were not about rule enforcement. They were about forcing us to sell. "What can we do about it?" asked Tom, a young father with 2 kids. "If she has lawyers and judges working for her, how do we fight back?" That was when I explained my plan. It was audacious. It was expensive. It was risky. But it was also the only way to beat Karen at her own game. I was going to buy the HOA and fire her. The Homeowners Association was a legal entity that could be purchased like any other organization. If I could acquire enough property to control the majority vote, I could remove Karen and her allies from the board. I could change the rules. I could expose the corruption, and I could protect the neighborhood from development. It would require buying at least 3 more houses in the neighborhood. That meant spending several $100,000 and taking significant financial risk. But Karen had made one critical mistake. Her harassment campaign had driven property values down. Houses that should have sold for $300,000 were available for $200,000 or less. "You would do that?" Margaret asked. "Risk that much money to stop her?" I thought about my destroyed shooting range. I thought about all the other families Karen had driven away. I thought about corruption winning because good people were too afraid to fight back. "Yes," I said, "I would do that." Acquiring controlling interest in the HOA took 4 months, and nearly every dollar I had saved over the past decade. I bought 3 houses that had been abandoned after Karen's harassment campaigns. I also convinced two neighbors to sell me their voting rights in exchange for guaranteed protection from future HOA enforcement. By September, I owned or controlled 7 of the 12 voting properties in the homeowners association. Karen had no idea what was happening. She was too busy planning the next phase of Pinnacle's development to notice that the balance of power had shifted completely. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday in October. Karen sent out the usual notices, expecting another quiet meeting with low attendance. She had prepared a presentation about new restrictions and fees that would make life even more difficult for remaining residents. But this year was going to be different. I had spent weeks preparing for this meeting. I had consulted with lawyers about proper procedures. I had gathered evidence of Karen's corruption and conflicts of interest. I had prepared new bylaws that would protect property owners from harassment. Most importantly, I had votes. The meeting was held in the same community center where I had first explained my plan to the neighbors. But this time, every single voting member was present. Karen arrived with her usual supporters, expecting to control the agenda like always. "Good evening, everyone," Karen said as she called the meeting to order. "We have several important items to discuss tonight, including new noise ordinances and landscaping requirements." "Point of order," I said, standing up with my folder of documents. "Before we discuss new business, I would like to call for a vote of no confidence in the current board." Karen looked confused. "That is not on the agenda." "According to the HOA bylaws, any voting member can call for a board election at the annual meeting," I replied. "I am exercising that right." Karen's lawyer whispered something in her ear. She looked pale as she realized what was happening. "You cannot just call for an election without proper notice." "Actually, I can," I said. I had done my homework. The bylaws require 30 days notice for special meetings, but the annual meeting can include any business related to HOA governance. Board elections qualify. I stood up and addressed the room. "I am calling for the immediate removal of Karen Matthews as HOA president based on conflicts of interest and abuse of authority." Then I began presenting my evidence. Bank records showing payments from Pinnacle Properties to Karen's legal fund, email communications between Karen and Pinnacle executives discussing development plans, documentation of the targeted harassment campaign designed to drive out property owners who might oppose rezoning. The room was completely silent as I laid out the conspiracy. Karen sat frozen, her face growing redder with each revelation. Her supporters looked shocked and confused. They had thought they were helping maintain neighborhood standards. They had not realized they were helping steal people's homes. "These are lies," Karen finally said. Her voice was shaking. "This is a desperate attempt to smear my reputation because I enforced legitimate HOA rules." "Then explain this," I said, pulling out the final piece of evidence. A signed agreement between Karen and Pinnacle Properties promising her a $50,000 commission for every property acquisition facilitated through HOA enforcement actions. Karen had been getting paid to drive neighbors away. Every family that sold their house because of her harassment had put money directly into her pocket. She was not protecting the neighborhood. She was selling it. "The vote for no confidence will now be held," I announced. "All in favor of removing Karen Matthews and the current board, please raise your hands." 7 hands went up immediately. Karen and her remaining supporters could only watch as they were voted out of power. The margin was not even close. "This is not legal," Karen said desperately. "You cannot just take over the HOA like this." Actually, I can, I replied. This is how democracy works. The majority of property owners have spoken. The next vote was for new board members. I was elected president unanimously. My supporters were elected to fill the other positions. Within 1 hour, we had completely transformed the leadership of the homeowners association. But I was not finished yet. As my first act as president, I announced, I am calling for a full investigation into the previous board's financial dealings. I am also implementing new bylaws that protect property owners from harassment and ensure transparency in all HOA actions. Karen stood up to leave, but I was not done with her yet. Karen, I said, you are fired from your position as neighborhood manager. Your services are no longer needed. The woman who had destroyed my shooting range and driven families from their homes looked at me with pure hatred. But there was nothing she could do. The power she had abused so ruthlessly was gone. As she walked toward the door, I called out one final message. Oh, and Karen, my shooting range will be rebuilt next month, with full HOA approval, of course. The satisfaction of watching her leave was worth every dollar I had spent and every sleepless night I had endured. Justice had finally been served. The shooting range was rebuilt within 6 weeks. This time, it was even better than before. I used the insurance money from the demolition lawsuit to upgrade the equipment and improve the safety features. The new range was a monument to perseverance and the power of fighting back against corruption. Karen tried to challenge the election results in court, but her legal options were limited. The HOA election had been conducted according to proper procedures with full documentation. Her lawyer eventually advised her to accept the outcome and focus on her own legal problems. Those legal problems were significant. Once I had control of the HOA, I turned over all evidence of Karen's corruption to the district attorney's office. The investigation revealed that Karen had violated multiple laws related to fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of fiduciary duty. She eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and agreed to pay restitution to the families she had harmed. Pinnacle Properties abandoned their development plans when the corruption became public. The negative publicity and legal exposure made the project too risky to continue. Our neighborhood remained zoned for rural residential use, protecting the character and property values that had attracted us in the first place. The new HOA board implemented policies that would prevent future abuse. All board meetings became open to the public with detailed minutes published online. Any proposed fines or enforcement actions required approval from a majority of homeowners, not just board members. Most importantly, we established clear conflicts of interest rules that prevented board members from profiting from their positions. Word of our successful fight against HOA corruption spread to other communities facing similar problems. I received calls and emails from property owners across the country asking for advice on how to organize against tyrannical board members. Each conversation reminded me that our struggle was not unique. Corruption thrives when good people feel powerless to fight back. The most important lesson I learned was that bullies depend on their victims feeling isolated and helpless. Karen had succeeded for so long because she convinced people that resistance was futile. She used legal complexity and financial pressure to make fighting back seem impossible. But corruption always creates vulnerabilities. People who abuse power for personal gain leave trails of evidence and make enemies who eventually find each other. Karen's greed and arrogance ultimately became the weapons used to defeat her. My shooting range today is better than ever. I practice there every weekend, usually with neighbors who have become friends through our shared experience of fighting corruption. The sound of gunfire in our valley is no longer a source of conflict. It is a reminder that free people can defend their rights when they are willing to stand together. Sometimes I look at the spot where Karen used to live. The house was sold after her foreclosure, and a nice family with young children moved in. Their kids play in the yard while I practice at my shooting range. Nobody complains about the noise because everyone understands that freedom is not quiet. Karen taught me an important lesson, though I doubt she intended to. She showed me that the price of liberty really is eternal vigilance. And sometimes, that vigilance requires buying an HOA and firing everyone who thinks they can steal your freedom.